not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well. I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on.
I think, first of all, everybody wants a ceasefire and a just peace deal for Ukraine as soon as possible. I think we're all delighted that Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff have now engaged directly with the European NATO countries and Ukraine itself, whereas hitherto they seem to have focused on the Russians in Moscow. This seems to be a very clear and demonstrative statement, presumably to be heard very clearly in the Kremlin, in Kyiv, and also in European capitals. I think initially people are thinking, well, it's the US completely walking away from this, really handing Putin exactly what he wants, because Putin doesn't want peace at the moment. He is escalating his attacks rather than de-escalating. But I think we need to look at it really from the perspective of what we're beginning to understand about the new American administration and their desire for business and deals. Almost at the same time that Marco Rubio has said the US might walk away, we hear that President Zelensky is on his way to Washington next week to sign this rare earth minerals deal, which could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars to the US. Almost in the same breath, we also hear that President Trump is expecting to visit the UK for a state visit in September this year, which seems to be the number one piece on his calendar. So when you put those together, it's possibly more likely that we should read into it that it's a final demand for Putin to come to stop fighting and come to the ceasefire table. And let's hope that is the meaning behind it. I think there is a very telling statement that came out of the Rubio-Witkoff visit to Europe. And I'll quote directly: "The American people desire to invest alongside the Ukrainian people in a free, sovereign and secure Ukraine." Now, if Russia is allowed to take Ukraine, obviously that won't happen. If there is not a just ceasefire and a peace deal, let's say along the lines that we've got at the moment, then that cannot happen. So without a just ceasefire, in a case where we draw the lines where they are at the moment, without that mineral deal will not take place. And it is obviously of significant importance to President Trump and his new team. So I think that what one reads into that is that, in the next few days, that deal will be signed, and the Kremlin and Putin have a few days or weeks to respond to it. But when one looks at the pure transactional nature of the Trump administration, one has to come to the conclusion that actually Trump wants that mineral deal more than he wants to completely get out of Ukraine and leave Ukraine to its fate. Because if it does that, there's no $300 billion worth of minerals coming towards the US anytime soon. It's from what perspective you look at it. I expect from the Kremlin perspective, they hope that the US would stop supporting Ukraine military and would disengage from the conflict. I think that is very unlikely, as we've discussed. If the US disengages from Ukraine, it's unlikely that their minerals deal will ever come to fruition. I expect from a Ukraine perspective and a European perspective, at the minimum, one would hope that the US military will provide a backstop for operations that are happening in Ukraine. It's clear that the European NATO countries are building up their military capabilities and looking to support Ukraine more. Even yesterday, the Danish army said that they were going to send soldiers into Ukraine to start learning lessons and training Ukraine people. In effect, that would be NATO countries on the ground in Ukraine. And I'm sure that other European NATO countries are thinking similarly. In the best case, one would hope that the US would step up its support to Ukraine. The US military is overwhelmingly superior to any other military on the planet, and they can really shift the dial if they decide to lean into this heavily. I expect that is unlikely. Having looked at this war over the last 3 years, I would expect that the US will continue supplying ammunition and vital sort of missiles and technology, and provide some sort of backstop. And it will be up to Ukraine and its European NATO partners to try and get into a position where the Russians are forced to the peace table, forced into a ceasefire, which at the moment the Russians are calling all the shots. And it's about time that actually the balance is switched back into the favor of Kyiv and the Ukrainian people, who are the ones who have been so badly wronged by this illegal invasion by the Russians. It's all about, the transactional nature of the Trump government. The mood music at the moment leads very much to the fact that if the Americans walk away, they're walking away from Moscow. They're not walking away from Kyiv and Europe. And that will be the worst possible scenario for Putin and the Russians, because they know that their time is numbered. If there is not the Americans keeping everybody apart, where you could have a situation where the Americans, in the best case for the Russians, are ambivalent. In the worst case, they lean behind the Ukrainians with their military power, which would really be the end of the Russians in Ukraine, I think. I mean, the final bit with this is, unfortunately, with Trump and people like Witkoff and Rubio, their tune changes, by the day, if not by the hour. So, when Rubio lands back in the US later today, is there going to be a different tone coming out? But I think it's when you look at the mood music and everything else that's going on at the moment, that you have to come to the conclusion that this may be a really important event, rather than just another bit of rhetoric being thrown around by a couple of senior guys in the American administration.